You're listening to Why We Do What We Do. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do. I am your gifted host, Abraham.
And I am your talentless host, Shane.
Talentless. We're a psychology podcast. We talk about the things that people do, how they do them, why they do them, and all that sort of thing. Sometimes we sort of dive more into the philosophy side of things, which personally I find to be among the most interesting, but we'll couch it inside of, real stories of real humans and their experiences. And then that way you don't feel like it's just like over your head mega philosophy armchairing. I mean, it is a little bit of armchairing, but it's grounded in real human experience.
And hopefully this episode doesn't make you feel less than adequate when we talk about some of these pretty incredible feats of human behavior.
Arguably, it should make you feel even better about who you are and who you could be. I have a whole sort of intro for this that we'll get into. But first, we'd like to say thank you so much for joining us. If you're with us for the first time, we appreciate you being here. You can support us by subscribing, leaving us a rating and review, joining us on Patreon, picking up some merch, telling a friend, or, starting a talent agency called Why We Do What We Do Talent Agency and giving us some amount of credit and maybe some amount of proceeds from the profits that you get from that. But if you were listening to this on the day that it publishes, good on you for staying up on your podcast feed so well. I have trouble with that myself.
Me too.
But I'd like to wish you a happy National Day of the Horse.
Horses are red. Also, it's National Cocoa Day. So if you like chocolate... Good day.
National Violin Day, so maybe a chocolate violin would allow you to combine those two.
Beautiful. It's also National Ice Cream Day, which, big fan.
A National Chocolate Ice Cream Violin.
I like it.
I mean, chocolate and ice cream go well beautifully here. So it is Pick a Pathologist Pal Day. Can you elaborate on this? What is that?
It's so much alliteration, first of all.
It's probably what it is. It's like alliteration about something, and they decided to go with pathologist.
Yeah, which is very specific. So this day encourages us to make friends with a pathologist or coroner because we never know what tomorrow holds. What?
Wow. Wow. That is okay. Moving on.
I'm gonna make friends with the coroner just in case I see you later.
That's right. Please treat my remains with respect. Should we meet again under different circumstances? Jeez. Okay. It is also National Cream Cheese Frosting Day. Just to gloss over the last one.
I mean, I like that. I'm a big Red Velvet fan, so that rules.
Yeah.
It's also Human Rights Week.
Yay.
As people on the show, we definitely support that.
Yes, the right to be human. It is also Lager Beer Week, so go do that thing if that's the thing you like to do.
If that's your preference, I guess, yeah.
Do it safely and responsibly, we recommend. Okay, ready for this, Shane?
Let's do it.
Let's talk about a very special person. The very special person we're going to talk about is named Simone Biles.
She rules.
She does rule. She won 2 world championship gold medals in 2013 when she was just 16 years old. She then won 4 more in 2014 and 4 more in 2015. Then she won the gold medal in all-around team vault and floor in 2016 at her first attendance of the Olympics. Her first time ever at the Olympics, won a gold medal in all of those. So just really, really impressive performance for her.
Absolutely. And Simone Biles has achieved 30 medals across various competitions, making her the most decorated gymnast in world championship history.
Right? That's amazing.
So cool.
An article in USA Today talks about her, quote, unique combination of natural talent, hard work, and smart training, end quote, making a pretty clear distinction between what they consider to be her training and her, quote unquote, natural talent.
Right, and this might not be an oversight by the writer of this article, as most people define talent as a natural aptitude. I mean, I think it's a really easy thing to default to when we say, oh yeah, they're just naturally talented.
So most of our sort of discerning listeners who have been with us for a while, and definitely those who share a similar philosophical worldview as the one we have so commonly espoused, will sort of already know where we are going with this episode. What is talent? How do we conceptualize this within a behavioral framework that we tend to bring to understanding concepts and behaviors that people do? So this one, while I think deep in the philosophy side of understanding human behavior, is also fairly straightforward. I think it's not a lot of complication or nuance in here. And as we said, couched largely in examples of real human experiences.
Absolutely. So it's nice to have one that's kind of more of a linear topic compared to some topics that we get into sometimes. We're getting ready to come up on one that is a little bit ridiculous. So
yes,
but so much fun. I guess maybe it's worth unpacking kind of what is talent. If that's the first question we're going to answer, then we need to ask that question. And talent is used most synonymously with other words such as skill, capacity, genius, ability, aptitude, giftedness, and knack, which I have all of those things. And they all suggested innate power and elevated performance within an individual, specifically as compared to other individuals who lack the same level of performance. It's not talent if it's as good as anyone else or anyone else can do it.
Yes. According to the dictionary, talent may be as old as the 12th century while carrying a similar meaning that it does today. And the idea of giftedness derived from the archaic and yet still contemporary somehow idea that one's general abilities and proclivities are a special gift granted by God or gods, depending on where you're coming from. Although this is not strikingly different, I think, from supposing that talents are gifted to one by nature in a sort of cosmic lottery of chance that someone would receive the talent bounty, and by chance it happened to be person X, Simone Biles in our previous example.
It's interesting that that is a very old way to look at it, but also a very current way that people still look at it. It's kind of just change the players,
Right.
Now, sometimes the evidence, quote unquote evidence of the talent is how quickly the skill can be developed, how early it is developed in someone's life, or most often how proficient the skill is performed when observed.
Yes. In a survey of the most talented people in history, a common list of achievers might include those such as Mozart, Beethoven, Leonardo da Vinci, Sir Isaac Newton, Margaret Mitchell, who, for those of you who don't know, this is actually someone, I was looking up famous people, and she was on the list. I actually didn't know she was the author of Gone with the Wind, but she was on that list of talented people. Judith Polgar, who is a grand chess master, Michelangelo, and Usain Bolt. For any of those who are not familiar with any of the names I listed, essentially, this is a long list of musicians, artists, painters, mathematicians, athletes, and I guess grand chess player as one.
Yeah, gamers, right?
Yes. And writers have expounded that, for example, Da Vinci had a, quote, hypertrophy of the visual function, end quote, which is to say they supposed that the reason he was so good is that he had an especially pristine eye and vision, and that Mozart was endowed with supernatural hearing abilities, and that was what allowed him to be so good at producing music, as his excellent ears.
Super interesting.
Yeah, or that Newton's brilliance was, quote, a grand sport of nature, end quote, meaning he essentially possessed nearly superhuman ability. It was supernatural. It was exceeding what humans would normally be capable of, is the idea that's sort of embedded in that.
I love, though, that people will write something like that where Mozart will be, because he had supernatural hearing abilities, that's why he was so talented. But that totally negates what Beethoven does.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, just think about it, you're like, wait a second. How did he come? Oh, it's like maybe Beethoven had a really great knack for putting pianos on floors.
That's what it was.
That's what it was. He's like, you know what? My talent is I hate piano legs. So we're going to just lay these pianos on the ground. But while talent is often used in describing skills in the arts or athleticism, it can also be applied to a manner of proficiency, including speaking, building, fixing, all sorts of skills like that. Although, of course, that skill has to be above average level of performance to be referred to as a talent.
Yes. Similarly embedded in talent and skill is this idea of genius, creativity, more broadly intelligence. We did a whole series on intelligence. For those of you who are there with us, or whether or not you were, we'll sort of be landing on a very similar place here as we did in our discussion about intelligence, which you'll sort of see as we unpack the rest of this.
Right. And then another topic related to this specific thing is circular reasoning. So how do we know Biles is talented? Well, because she is the most decorated gymnast in the world championship history. Why is she the most decorated? Because she has so much talent. And so you kind of start seeing it like the snake eating its own tail when you start discussing this stuff. It's like the cause begets the effect, which begets the cause. And the evidence of the cause is the effect. The explanation for the effect is the cause. So none of that makes sense when you really get into it.
Yeah, just philosophically speaking, you can't use the effect of something to assume the cause and then justify the cause by pointing to the effect.
Right.
Again, grass is green because of its greenness. That's not why it's green. That doesn't make any sense.
Right, exactly.
The logic is flawed. It is a logical fallacy.
Yes.
So talent is perceived to be something we either get or we don't get by many people. If we sort of couch it inside of that idea of it being natural, innate, endowed in us from birth or by our genes or by nature, the cosmic lottery of chance. Many, of course, do seem to implicitly refer to talent as something that you're good at because you've worked at it. But it is implied, even in those spaces, that at least some amount of talent is kind of luck of the draw. But it is good that the person works at it too. They're sort of saying like, you're so talented, you got lucky that you got to be so talented. Good for you. And it's great that you work at this, just in case it's not granted non-contingently to you. At least it's good that you can continue to practice. Otherwise, that innate talent might go away.
Right. Yeah. It's like, just in case.
What an oxymoron of a statement.
I know. Isn't that wild to think about? It is fascinating, too, to think that, like, there is a divine intervention where, like, somebody gives you talent, but then, like, totally just screws somebody else over. And also this idea of like raw talent, like the idea that raw talent exists, which means that you would have to mine talent or like process talent, or that you need like a talent refinery to make your talent work.
Yeah. And again, presumably thinking about what that means is sort of, as we said, that like when someone is likely to call something talent, it has to be in excess of what you might expect from your average performer.
Right.
Possibly even among, the top possible performances as ranked by somebody who's doing some metric against which they're comparing that performance to others.
Right.
The fastest or the longest or the highest or whatever, metric they might use. So that's one aspect of it. And then the other is just looking at like, that looks so competent.
Right.
So competent. And then without considering how did we get there? I can't do this quadruple backflip from a standing position like Simone Biles can do.
Not yet.
That's the point. Is like, does that mean that she can just do this because she can do it? She's lucky. She's got the genes for it. Does it mean I just can't because I was just unlucky? I just didn't get the genes for it. And that's exactly it. It's just like people look at the performance itself and then call that talent as a descriptive term, a reaction to a highly proficient performance.
And I do like the idea that your New Year's resolution is to learn gym routines, like gymnast routines, so that you can outcompete Simone Biles, and you're flipping and you're doing the floor routines. And I don't know, your song, I feel like your song would be Bootylicious at the Olympics. And you would do the flips and the cartwheels and you would stick the landing, and it would be absolutely beautiful.
Never mind that I'm like 12 years her senior, but
listen, talent, if it's raw talent, then it doesn't matter when you mine it.
And how would we know? But suppose that we mine the opposite of raw talent, which is ads. Okay, so we listened to, it takes some amount of talents to make ads. You got people, which is to say, we're using that term very loosely now. It takes some amount of proficiency to make ads. You got people who spent time doing that sort of thing, and their whole shtick in life is to just ruin everyone's day.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
So rude.
They're going to pay to do a job. It's, everybody's doing the thing. It's the people who make the choices that pay for that person to do that terrible job that we should be angry at. That was a lot of time spent talking about ads. What is the answer when we're talking about talent here? How do we talk about talent and how these people got so talented?
Right. So let's, I think, start by pointing out what is known about the list of famously talented people from the earlier discussion. As one Sir Isaac Newton biographer discussed, Newton came from a family of utterly unremarkable people who achieved very little. But Newton would shut himself up in his room and work for days or weeks on end on his experiments and math equations, rejecting food, rejecting sleep, and definitely socialization. He's not known for being a very social person.
No, he's not.
In favor of working and learning nonstop. And as Newton recalled in response to praise for his talents, he said, quote, "I had no special sagacity, only the power of patient thought," end quote.
Yes. And this seems like a good time to unpack a vocab word here.
Yeah. So what is sagacity?
So sagacity essentially refers to keen mental performance, shrewdness or cleverness. You think of sagacity as being someone not just who's particularly bright or intelligent, but is like discerning, that they can use their intellect in a clever and thoughtful and maybe strategic way.
Right. So first of all, you're never going to hear me say that word again, like ever.
It's a good word.
It's a good word, but I just know that I will never say that again because of how much I just struggled with it.
I'm going to write it in every episode now.
And I'm going to be like, what is this word again? Basically, what he was saying was that he was no smarter than anyone else. He just spent a lot of time thinking about things, which, you want to talk about context and opportunity, something to think about.
Yeah. And I mean, you could call that being humble, but I also think that he was self-reflecting in a meaningful and important way in understanding what contributed to the production that he was able to engage in. Is that he spent a lot of time on this stuff,
Right.
Most people were not locking themselves in their rooms, learning as much as they could, doing experiments and math equations and thinking through things. He was uniquely so relative to pretty much everyone that was around him. So that is a very relevant factor in trying to understand how did he get to the point at which he was this prolific mathematician, one of, at the time, smartest people in the entire world, possibly still, could be considered relative to many others.
Right.
A historian of Beethoven discovered in Beethoven's notes and leftover materials that Beethoven scrapped and rewrote his compositions as many as 20 times. He worked at and constantly revised his work just over and over again until landing on exactly the composition he liked. He never accepted anything but the best he thought he was capable of doing, but it took dozens or more attempts to get there, where he would write something and then he would rewrite it, and then he'd, fiddle with it and change it and omit it and scrap it and rewrite it and revise it constantly and over again. And it was not this like he just sat down at the piano and cranked out these masterful compositions. He spent tons of time revising every performance that he developed.
As a musician myself, I think that's something that's really fascinating to look at, is that some musicians will write something and never look at it again. They'll write it, they'll put it out, they'll never touch it again. They won't revise it. And then other musicians will do that. I am of the former, where I will write something. I'm like, I don't want to touch that again, because if I touch it, I'm going to overwork it and I'll mess that up. Whereas Beethoven will be like, nah, we're gonna get this. I'm gonna make this a finely tuned thing. And I think, and you see that too with authors, right? So Margaret Mitchell would write and rewrite chapters of Gone with the Wind over and over again to get the exact sentiment or story that she wanted to best move the book along. And reportedly, she would rewrite entire chapters as many as 30 times before being satisfied and ready to move on. That's a lot of writing.
That's a lot. Like that. Talk about overworking. Like, after you've rewritten the same chapter the 5th time and you're like, great, only 25 more to go, and like that's so much work. That's so much work.
That in itself is a book.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
The rewrites themselves are a single book.
Yeah. If you wrote that chapter once, but did 30 versions of it, you have a book length treatment of a story.
Right.
It is that amount of work that goes into it. In response to praise for his work, Michelangelo responded, quote, "I'm lucky that toxic waste, colloquially referred to as ooze, mutated my body into the perfect crime-fighting machine." Wrong Michelangelo. Also, he had a sensei who trained him rigorously in the martial arts. So,
for sure.
There was that. The original Michelangelo, the painter of the Sistine Chapel and sculptor of the statue of David, among many others, he said about how impressive and inexplicable his mastery, quote, "If people knew how hard I have worked to gain my mastery, it would not seem wonderful at all," end quote. And again, really show that he put so much time and work and effort into carefully honing his art, his skill, his products, to the point where he said, like, the amount of time I've spent on this would make it seem like this is a mundane skill. Right. Possibly someone, and I think the sentiment he sort of was communicating there is that if someone had spent as much time on this as I have, they might be even better at it than I am. Like, right. I just, I've spent a lot of time on it and most people haven't, but that doesn't mean I'm actually any good at this. I've just worked really hard at it.
Right. I think that's really important. And you'll see that as we kind of go forward. So Simone Biles practices twice a day, 3 days a week, and once a day, 2 days per week, only ever taking 1 day off. So she practices a lot.
Yeah.
And she practices upwards of 7 hours per day and uses some of the best trainers in the world. So when we say, like, maybe you do something twice a day, 3 days a week, you're like, yeah, that doesn't seem like a lot. Some of those days are 7 hour days.
Yeah. It's like a full day of work.
Not days, 7-hour practice sessions. Like 7-hour I mean, this is effectively her job now, right? Like she's getting paid to do this thing.
That's exactly it. Gets up and goes, I have to go to work, where she then goes and just trains at the gym for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours.
Right. And it shows.
It really shows. Absolutely. You consider this. Would any of us be able to perform at the level of these experts given a similar level of training and dedication? Likely, yeah. Likely we would.
Right.
We'd probably make sort of a different version of whatever they made, given, whatever their place they were at in their circumstance relative to whatever place we would have been at in our circumstance coming at it. But we would have done so with a comparable level of skill and acuity. So, I think just sort of to Michelangelo's point, like if I had spent as much time working on sculpting and painting and the things that he did, would I have been able to do something as good as some of those works? Very possibly,
Right.
Very probably. In fact, I'd probably make something different. It wouldn't look exactly like his did, but I could do some with equal aplomb,
Right.
It is the amount of work he spent in it. And I think that's something that's really important to consider in looking at these performances.
Right. I mean, it's that whole Watson thing, right? I could take any baby and make him a surgeon or whatever I want him to be, right? Like, that's kind of how he said it. I know he said it in jest, but like that's the idea, is that when you have an organism that has the same set of circumstances, the same set of opportunities, the same amount of time, like, or at least like just a basic opportunity repetition, you could possibly get to that same level or a similar enough level that it's comparable.
Yeah.
And there are also those of us that produce things that some other people really enjoy, but aren't particularly difficult to make. Nickelback comes to mind.
Yeah.
Right. Specifically in music, that people really enjoy it, but it takes very little work or imagination to create.
Yeah.
Honestly, a lot of pop music is like that too. When you listen to pop music, you kind of get into it. You're like, oh, that's the same chord as every other song.
Musically not interesting at all.
No, not even close. Just got a really catchy hook and a really good aesthetic.
And there are those too who like, they aren't actually very good at singing, but like computers can auto-tune their voice. So they sort of show up and sort of wail into a microphone, and then the engineers can make it sound like this beautiful vocalization. Now, I think most professional singers actually do receive specific training and coaching, and like they do get good at actual singing, but you don't necessarily have to be.
Right.
We've got the technology for anybody to walk into a studio and produce something that's effectively a gold record level quality in terms of how much it could possibly sell. Not that they're any good at music in any way. We've just developed it. We've lowered the bar of entry to all you have to do is have a pulse, essentially.
It's been real rough on music for some of us out here.
Yeah. So all this is to say, is sort of a main thesis here that we'll sort of keep coming back to, is that people who are exceptionally good at things work exceptionally hard at those things. Michael Jordan lamented later in his life how often people treated his skill as if it were a God-given gift. And this just ignored, and he talked about this, it ignored the colossal amount of time he spent practicing all day, every day as a child and throughout his career. Even when he was in the professional, he was still practicing with a trainer for like 5 hours a day. And he said, we limit ourselves by believing that greatness must be born into us instead of earned through hard work and dedication. Essentially saying, people who assume that I'm good at this because I'm just good at it are selling themselves short that they could also be as good at it or better if they put in this, similar level of work. But he would sit outside and just practice throwing baskets, for hours when he was younger, and then, just kept on training throughout his life.
And that is ultimately the argument for equitable practices around resources, right? I mean, that is the argument, is that you never know how good somebody or how much talent somebody could have if they never have the opportunity to even do the thing. I hear that a lot about like the arts and having arts in schools. It's like there are kids that will never be exposed to the opportunity to practice the arts because their public schools are not going to allow it, or there's no programs locally. So we may have the next Michelangelo or the next Banksy or the next Picasso or whoever it is, the next Frida Kahlo. They may exist in some neighborhood where the arts can't ever get to it because there's no equitable practice around this. And I think that's a really important thing that's maybe something that we're going to land on later, but I think it's important to kind of talk about when we start talking about hard work and dedication. Sometimes that only exists based on opportunity.
Yeah. And I think arguably to that point, it does exist in every neighborhood, but the circumstances never prevail to foster that kind of skill.
Right.
Someone who might be an extraordinary virtuoso at violin never picks up a violin. Mm-hmm. But honestly, that could have been anybody, because anybody with the right amount of training and coaching and development and practice as far as we know, anybody can get good at these things.
Right. Absolutely. So the remarkable singers of our time spend tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars on vocal coaches and know how to do warm-ups and practice exercises to ensure the best possible performance of their vocal cords. They practice consistently, constantly, and under the guidance of rigorously trained professionals, and even do physical exercises to ensure that their diaphragms are in optimal condition. I mean, even Ozzy Osbourne talked about the workout regimen that he would do just to go on tour.
Yeah, right.
The amount of cardio that he would do is pretty wild. So for her performance of The Sound of Music at the Oscars, Lady Gaga trained with a coach every day for 6 months. This is from someone who is already a well-established and highly competent performer. She still trained and trained and trained.
Just on that performance, like that was the amount of work it took. And I mean, it was an incredible performance and well regarded and lauded by critics and many people alike. But like, that wasn't just out of the blue. It's like, oh, I should sit down and play the song and then just did it. It took tons of work. Like, if you can imagine like a 5-minute performance, you're going to spend 5 minutes on this thing and then spend the next half a year. Like, at the time that this episode comes out, like this, this coming June, you will have practiced enough where you're practicing every day, every single day. You're practicing this for one like 5-minute little performance that you'll do at the end of the whole thing. Like, that's incredible dedication for a pretty small output. I mean, obviously she got paid a lot of money, was well regarded, lots of people, heaping praise on her, but the overall performance itself was 6 months worth of work for 5 minutes worth of output. Right. And it takes that level of distillation of skill and practice to produce that level of competency in a performance.
And just as another example, Penn of Penn and Teller has frequently discussed that they practice their routines up to hundreds of times before they take them on stage. And he said that they get so fluent and proficient at their tricks, they are literally thinking about other things while performing some of the tricks, including dialogue. And he has said that they are so well choreographed and timed that they know that as if, like kind of second nature, how much time they have to grab a snack off stage while the other is performing. I mean, that's pretty impressive stuff.
It is a well-oiled, tightly dialed performance that they give, and they know how to do it because they have practiced it so incredibly extensively. They are just very, very, very fluent at what they do.
Right.
It's really the more useful question in understanding where this comes from is implied by this discussion we've just had, is how does it developed? And essentially is, as we've described, it is developed through this incredible amount of practice and hard work, dedication, often coaching, access to resources that allows you to do those things, having the ability to spend time on this, which again restricts a lot of people who do not have the means to spend that kind of time on one particular activity or performance. And, look at us. How did we get so good at podcasting? We've recorded 340 plus episodes. Arguably, we're not good at it.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll get there after, 10,000 episodes. Maybe that's the trick.
One day. I mean, and also just to kind of, just like for full transparency's sake, it takes hours of work per episode, reading and writing to put together a single hour of content every week.
Yes.
There is practice and hard work. I mean, it helps that we're both really brilliant, but that's neither here nor there. That's our raw talent speaking. No, but we do actually do a lot of work. We do a lot of work behind the scenes to make these episodes as good as they are. And it's a lot of practice. I mean, for the 340 episodes, it's hours of work in each episode.
It is. That's true. It is a high level of work distilled down into like 45 minutes to an hour of content. And to your point, we also spent way too much money and in just an enormous amount of time, stress, and misery going to grad school. We went to grad school for years and years and years and years and years, reading, studying, being coached and guided by our mentors, writing, experimenting, and like all of those things sort of shaped up where we're at. And as we're tooting our own horn, this also didn't come from nowhere. We're lucky enough that we could go to grad school. Many people never find themselves in that circumstance.
Right.
And we're lucky enough to have the kind of mentors and people around us that shaped us into the people that we are with the kinds of skills that we have. And I think there are a lot of people who are much better at this than we are. But,
Sure.
I think that we are good at what we do on this particular podcast, but talent is worked at. I think that's sort of the main point here is talent's at worked at. Now, quick note thing. We've got a paid version of Hulu, but it's like the lowest tier. And somehow when you have the paid version of Hulu, they still throw ads at you. And this just the other day went to go watch a show and I accidentally put on the wrong episode, had to sit through like 2 minutes of ads before I realized it was the wrong episode. So I went to go put on the right episode. I had to sit through another 2 minutes of ads before I realized that that was the wrong episode, found the correct episode and started, and had to sit through another 2 minutes of ads. It was like 6 minutes of my life I wasted on these ads, you pernicious bastards. And yet we have to do it to you. I'm so sorry, listeners. We'll be right back.
Bye.
Going hard after the advertisers today. Going hard.
The ones that are paying us for stuff.
The ones that are paying us. But we recently did an episode on influencers and how much they make. And if we were to look at exactly our ad numbers and then guess how much you make from advertising by being an influencer, it would be almost nothing. But nevertheless, we do appreciate what few scraps they throw at us, because it does help. It allows us to do something and continue to do this podcast. We really do appreciate our Patreons. And if you like this show, you can join them over there. We'll talk more about that at the end of this discussion. Let's instead move on to what role does nature play in helping us be talented performers?
I would imagine that if you're listening to this episode and you're going, I am not the same build or structure and do not have the same genetic features as Simone Biles. Like for me, I'm 6'3". She is much shorter than me, which makes her an ideal candidate for being a gymnast, and makes me a small forward in the NBA, if that.
Really good comparison.
Very different kind of structures. But we can acknowledge that in comparing the expectations of people with disabilities to people without, there would be those discrepancies in the ability to do certain skills in general, depending on the skill. Said another way, some people will have an easier or more difficult time with some skills, depending on whether or not they have a physical condition that might make some skills more difficult. Someone who is born without vision will have a more difficult time learning to drive than someone who is born with vision. Considering the technology that is available today, this may change in the future with advancements and stuff like that, as more of those activities become more accessible to folks that are born with disabilities.
But yeah, just exactly that. As you compare those features, we must have the requisite physiological features to do certain things. No human being can survive in the vacuum of space, unprotected by some kind of clothing for more than a few minutes. No human can flap their arms fast enough or in a skilled enough orientation that they're able to achieve liftoff and fly through the air unaided by other technology.
Right.
So no one will be good at flying, yet this is a simple activity for a bird or a bat or a flying insect for whom they barely need to work on this behavior to be able to perform it with ease and fluency. Some of them don't even have a centralized brain, and yet they're able to do this thing that is completely beyond what humans are capable of doing, because their physiology allows that kind of behavior to develop so effortlessly.
Right. So an animal born with the capability of flying, but never given the chance to develop the skill, or existing in an environment where it can never be used, still will not fly, no matter how easy or naturally occurring it is for them. So if they have the capability, but they don't get the chance to develop it, they don't live in a space where they simply can't do it, even if it is easy for them.
Yeah, I mean, and as an example of this, some experiments have done this with birds. These would not be considered ethical today. This was back in like the 30s or 40s or something. But they kept birds from being able to fly during their early development, and all they ever did was walk around. They were completely restricted from ever flying. And then what happened is they let loose a dog or a cat, and the bird simply ran away and hid. It didn't try to fly because it didn't know how, like it never had learned. Even though flying is so easy and natural for them normally, they do still have to work at it. But they could not fly away even to save their own lives when threatened by one of these creatures. And I don't think that they let the animals kill the bird. Again, this is a long time ago, but I'm hoping that they didn't. But really the point being that like that thing that looks so effortless for them is still something they have to develop. As far as we know, this is even true for like as simple an organism as a spider. Like if we put them in a situation where they cannot get their web to stick to anything, will they still be able to form a competent web when they're later in life, when they're finally given access to a thing? I mean, I don't know if anyone's done that experiment, but that is something that they practice and they get better at, and then they practice and they practice and they practice. And it does look easy and effortless for them, but their biology is set up for that sort of thing.
Right.
Even if I excreted sticky stuff from my abdomen, I don't know that I'd be able to form a very good web unless I practiced at it for a while, but eventually I'd be able to.
I would be very uncomfortable if you did that.
Yeah, that is understandable.
Yeah, please don't do that.
Don't go on my abdomen web, my abdomen goo web.
Nope, don't like it. Now, no other animals have demonstrated the use of language in the way or to the extent that humans use language, and I think that's kind of something that is going to play a unique role in all of this as well. humans learn to speak with barely any direct teaching at all. So we start kind of babbling and making noise almost from the womb. I mean, we are a vocal species.
Yeah.
There is something about the arrangement of our vocal cords and features of our brains that allow us to develop speech early and easily. And I think that's something to consider when we start talking about the fact that not every human speaks.
Yeah. Well, exactly. We've seen that people who are prevented from speaking early in life may have difficulty ever learning to speak later in life, even though it is generally very easy for us to do. Is that there is during our development, we start to learn and develop these things. And the longer we go without doing that as part of our development, the harder it is for us to then pick it up later. Because at that point, we have sort of formed other habits around how we use our vocal cords and our mouths. And we don't get an opportunity for practice and feedback, such that the practice and feedback we get then is a lot more difficult to mold, because it's now trying to overcome other habits and probably some amount of atrophy, honestly, like a lack of the opportunity, lack of muscle development, lack of coordination of the vocal cords and the lips and the tongue that they've just never been able to use. And it's really difficult. And so even though it seems fairly early or fairly easy for humans to do is to produce this speech thing, and it is generally, if restricted from doing so, then we don't do it. So again, it's one of those things that it still must have an opportunity to develop.
Right. But excluding physical restriction or skill development, why then are some people better at skills such as drawing or musical instruments or math or whatever, when presumably they had the same opportunity as someone else trying to learn that skill who has a more difficult time with it? So there are some times in situations where multiple people have the same opportunity to engage in a skill, and one excels over the other person, despite the fact that they've had the same opportunity, they have the same resources, the same ability to do those things.
At least it seems so. We observe that some people do pick up some skills more easily than others. We simply cannot. We've observed that.
Right.
I think people listening to this will have been yelling at this, saying like, "What about people who they the first time they try it, they do they start to pick it up really quickly."
Right.
And there are some scenarios where people have a slight edge in their physiology that allows them to capitalize on training more so than another might. But it's likely almost imperceptibly minuscule what edge they get from their overall physiology. The important part here is how they got to the point where they could pick up that habit or that skill or that performance. What got them to that point first?
Right. And I think every skill or performance is comprised of dozens or hundreds or even thousands of other smaller foundational skills. Even people who seem to learn things effortlessly, we must account for what other skills they had already established before assuming that any of their performance was natural, if you want to understand what role nature plays. So far, no one has done this as far as we know. I mean, you think about skills like awareness of body positioning or sensations, like just proprioceptive feedback. And some people can pick that up. Some people can visualize and calculate the arch of the ball they're throwing. And that's why you have Steph Curry, who can sink so many threes from every single part of the basketball court, because he practices so much. But one of the micro skills that's in that is being able to see and identify and visualize angles for the trajectory of the ball. So that comes with practice, but it's like a specific skill set that he's got. It's unbelievable watching him.
I've heard this about like some of those really professional pool players, that they're so good at visualizing angles and like understanding sort of momentum and how that contributes to movement around the board and angles, and that is essentially why they're so good at it. But again, they do practice this a lot. So what I'm saying here, I guess, is that like someone who actually does have better than average vision, better than average hearing, for some reason, their muscles are strung up in such a way that they're like pretty reactive, fast, and recover quickly. Like they will have that edge where when given the opportunity to practice and train, it does look a little easier for them.
Right.
That is a little bit of sort of luck of the draw, but there's no skill that they can develop that they would not have been good at if they had not had the opportunity to try.
Right.
Again, the edge that it gives is relatively minor. What talent, what proficiency, what ability they gain comes from practice, coaching, feedback, and all of those micro skills that got them there in the first place. If you can imagine like a chess prodigy have we accounted for every spatial task they've ever done that could allow them to visualize and plan ahead? Have we accounted for every activity where they had to construct or plan something that they will have ever practiced and done, where they got feedback and routine and habit around that before they ever saw a chessboard? Have we ruled out the fact that they've never seen or heard of any game or competition before where they could possibly understand the rules? Like, no, we haven't done that. We don't know all the skills that they have fostered and developed the first time that they sit down and learn chess, such that then they were able to capitalize on their learning experiences in that moment faster than someone who did not have those same experiences that they had going into that scenario, who then's trying to capitalize on a less robust history that would facilitate them being good at that skill. No one's done that analysis, and I don't think that we can, because you'd have to follow someone every minute of every day, and then also try and understand the relative importance of every experience that they have. So, like, it's, I think, an impossible question to answer, and we'll get to, I think, another philosophical question that helps us understand why we just need to be conservative about this approach. But, you know, the sort of short takeaway from that is just that it is not something that we can explicitly understand what kind of advantage is granted to you by nature, except to say that we know that it's got to be small. Like, you got to have the physiological basis for it, but you also have to have the opportunity, experience, and opportunity for practice to get good at it. Researchers exploring the development of a particular set of skills, and an example I'm looking at here, it was typing skills, described, quote, the whole process of learning as the gradual building up of hierarchical habits, end quote. Which I think it says this beautifully well. That talks about the fact that some habits are sort of clumped together versions of smaller habits, and that those then contribute to a sort of clumped together version of a slightly more larger habit. And it just keeps building and building until you have what looks like highly competent performance that started as many individual smaller foundational steps.
Well, and I think to add to that, like, it's also, there's so much contextual stuff to go into that make those variables that are just, you can't account for all of them. So, like, as the example that I was kind of thinking about as we were talking about this was that I tend to try to be pretty humble about stuff, but one thing I was really good at when I was playing baseball was I was a good hitter. And so to kind of establish that discussion, I had, going into playing baseball in high school, I had my vision tested and I had 20/15 vision. So I had really good vision. You know, I practiced. And just kind of like the physiological parts, right? I could swing a baseball bat quickly. I was strong enough to swing a baseball bat at a certain size. I could see really well. And that all made for me, that kind of primed me for being a good hitter. But I also played baseball from the time that I was 4. I played all year round. I preferred hitting and batting versus fielding. I was playing against kids my age all year who had, like, you know, I'd seen all different types of pitches. I was trained to identify different pitches when they were released from the pitcher's hand. So you could see the difference between a curveball versus a slider versus a baseball with a snap judgment. I mean, you're talking about fluency, proficiency, opportunity. And why I was batting so well is because I was playing literally all year round. I was practicing multiple times a day, every day for years by the time I got to high school.
Not to mention the copious amount of steroids you were taking.
I was taking so many steroids. Like, Barry Bonds was my hero, you know? And so walking into 9th grade with a full beard and just mad at everybody.
Testicles the size of baseballs themselves.
Oh my God. Yeah, it was a wild time. I'm so glad I got off of those. I think it's one of those things where when you kind of put all that together, you go, okay, there's so many other variables to look at. Like, I lived in the South where I could play baseball all year round. Somebody up north can't.
Yeah.
You know, I played with the same kids, so I got exposed to the same pitches over and over and over again, so that I kind of knew what to predict.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of things that kind of go into that, you know, it's really difficult to pin down over, you're talking 12 years of learning history before I entered high school, or before I got to that point where I was batting like that.
I mean, your point about the North-South thing explains why the Yankees are so bad.
Oh my God! Boo! Boo!
Just kidding. I
got so mad. I hit my mic. But no, I mean, I don't care about the Yankees. Everybody hates the Yankees.
I actually have no feelings about the Yankees at all. I just couldn't think of another baseball team that was from the North. So I was like, that's what I'm going to throw out. Speaking of throwing things out, taking copious amounts of steroids and other things that you shouldn't do, we're going to have to play some more ads. All right, let's wrap this up by we're continue to focus on, again, sort of some philosophical arguments and considerations here. There's a quote I found in a book I really liked that talks about talent and what it is. And so they talk about talent is focused time and attention on any activity, quote, so that one behaves energetically and proficiently with respect to these things and can bring to bear upon any present behavior situation, results in similar experiences, end quote. And I think they meant to say that results in similar experiences in that one. But I think they said exactly summarize the things that we've sort of talked about so far in this discussion.
Right. So we can consider understanding talent by asking a couple questions at least. What amount of genetics can we rule out of proficiency? And what amount of environmental circumstance and practice history can we rule out? And the answer is 0. You can't rule any of those things out. Performance does not happen without genetics, and genetics cannot produce a skill that has no opportunity to be performed. So those two things are in it. You can't separate them. The fact that you cannot rule them out, I think, makes it a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, exactly. That question, I think, gets at the heart of how we would try and make sense of what is natural talent, which is to say there isn't a natural talent.
Right.
Not in the way that a lot of people think, at the very least. There's also the question that some people might have, like, what about twins? Could we, do twin studies where we looked at twins raised together versus raised apart, often said reared together or reared apart? Can we determine what amount of talent is due to genes by comparing those? Well, no, it's a nonsensical question. I mean, twins raised apart or together will still have a unique enough set of circumstances that their similarities or differences are most parsimoniously determined by their individual learning history. Even doing this comparison will show that when one is good at something and the other is not, it is due to competencies developed through training for more proficiency. When they're both good at it, they've both worked at it. And even when only one works at it, like the other one likely has been around when they're raised together, one will have been present for the learning of the other. They're around when the other one practices and engages, even if they choose not to participate. Like, I might have a slight edge at playing piano, even if I never practice, if I live with someone who's a virtuoso at a piano. Right. Like, at the very least, I'm familiar with what chords and scales should sound like. At the very least, I have some idea of what, like, finger placement, movement, and coordination looks like. Right. So, like, I have a model that shows me some amount of proficiency there. And then the other thing too is considering this whole thing like raised apart and like they're both good at this one thing must be their genes. But I mean, the same logic that would apply of like an expert painter is not amazed when they meet another expert painter that they're not both related by blood somehow. Like, someone who is a particular, like a super skilled painter and meet someone who's like, wow, you're really good at painting too. We must be brothers. I'm like, no, nobody thinks or says that, because it should not be surprising that some people who are related are good at particular skills any more than people who aren't related are good at particular skills. You know what I mean?
Right, exactly. And so I guess maybe a way to kind of round this out is that talent, like genius, like creativity, like intelligence, is just a set of competencies in development. At the point that we observe a performance and call it talent, it has been through enough development or more development than most other people have ever gone through. So when somebody reaches that level where they are quote unquote talented, they are an expert at a thing, it's because they have been exposed and practiced that skill so many times that at that point in time, they are proficient. They have mastered that.
Yeah. And when, we call it talent because it looks like a higher level of proficiency than we would expect in ourselves and other people, etc. As David Shank wrote in his book, The Genius in All of Us, quote, everyone is born with differences and some with unique advantages for certain tasks, but no one is genetically designed into greatness and few are biologically restricted from attaining it, end quote. And although I don't totally agree with the idea that some are born with unique advantages, sort of as we discuss, like where there are advantages, they're going to be fairly minute in terms of what they actually do contribute. They're not nothing. Right. Like, as I said, I think what they give you is a relative edge to capitalize more efficiently and more effectively on the kinds of training and experiences you might have. Right. But they also, like, someone who doesn't have those advantages can still get just as good or better at that skill depending on the kind of work that they put into it. And so I don't know that there is much in the way of unique advantages. There's some. I mean, he's not totally wrong. I just don't know how much weight I would put into that part of the definition. But I think his final point is a really good one, is that we're not genetically designed into greatness and few are biologically restricted from attaining it. Right. Again, it's not nobody, but like there is going to be a spectrum of sort of physiological arrangements and capabilities and that sort of thing. As far as we described, like People who are shorter are probably going to find gymnastics easier. People who are taller are probably going to find basketball easier, etc.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, and those are physiological arrangements that give them a very real edge. But a tall person is not going to be good at basketball just because they're tall if they never practice. And a short person's not going to be good at gymnastics just because they're short unless they train.
Right.
Again, they give you that edge. They do not give you the recipe.
Right. And I think also, too, it's important to remember that, like, in the space of talent and, like, those things that you mentioned, like stuff like sports and whatnot, like, sports are specifically designed by humans. So, like, how we interact with those contingencies are themselves arranged by humans. So they're completely made up. Like, they're not occurring. Basketball's not occurring in a natural environment.
Right.
You're not going out into a jungle and then discovering, like, you're stumbling upon a basketball game. Like, that's not what's happening, right? So I think it's also important to remember that, like, despite whether we're talking about genetic kind of opportunities or we're talking about, like, learning opportunities or any of those things, I still think it's really important that, like, those things that we're talking about where people have talent are editable and changeable because we have designed those things ourselves.
Yes.
We can adapt our environments to make sure that people that don't have those advantages can still access those things in a meaningful way.
Beautifully said. You're exactly right. Is that, like, a lot of what we've developed that people have been able to capitalize on and get good at that has been restricted from others. The barrier to entry has been lifted as many technologies have come along and made it more accessible so that people who don't have all the same physiological characteristics can nevertheless get really good at those performances. And I think that we keep striving toward that. I think the goal should always be to continue to strive to make as equitable access to resources and opportunities as possible to people, regardless of their relative social status, their wealth, or their physical capabilities. Like a person who, we've seen now that people who are born with or end up at some point through circumstance, a lack of use of their legs can become very good at basketball, and they can become very good at racing. They can become very good at a variety of sports because people have strived to make those things accessible to them.
Right.
And, we are planning a discussion down the road and talking about accessibility and how that needs to just be on the forefront of everything that we do, I think, moving forward as a huge consideration.
Right.
Anyway, you said it better than I did. I just pontificated a bunch about it. So we should have ended on your point, but I just kept talking.
I think we landed in the same place. I think we're good. That's the talent that we have together.
Great. Well, I think another talent could be recognizing when we have run out of things to say. Part of that is that the notes are done, but also, that doesn't always stop us. It didn't today. So we are going to go ahead and start to wrap this up. I'd like to, as I said, if you like what you heard today, if you'd like to support us, please consider joining us on Patreon. The people who do that, you get access to all kinds of other goodies. And honestly, it just really helps us do this show. Like, we really do depend on those people. And it's so kind and generous and wonderful of you. You get ad-free stuff. You still have to listen to the ad segues, but just, there's just a short break and then the episode comes back. Right. You don't have to actually suffer through the misery that is ads. The other thing that you get is we thank those people, the wonderful people who help make this show happen, which includes Mike M, Megan, Layla, Mike T, Justin, Kim, Joshua, Brad, Stephanie, Olivia, Brian, and Ashley. Again, and for always and forever, thank you so much for all that you have done for us and all that you continue to do.
Y'all are the most wonderful, and we appreciate you.
And we definitely, of course, thank all of our listeners today. There'd be no point in having a show if we didn't have people who are listening to it every week. And we've had some wonderful people who listen to us and write into us and join us on the various platforms that they join us on. So thank you for being here. Also, thank you so much to my team, without whom this entire podcast would not be possible. Writing and fact checking from Shane and myself, production and editing from Justin, and our social media coordinator is Emma Wilson. Is there anything that you have before we get to our recommendations, Shane?
No, I don't think so.
All right. Awesome. Well, then let's, again, if you're joining us for the first time, it's a thing we do. We're going to recommend some things.
Yay!
Recommendations.
I'm recommending a book. I just finished this book recently. I've only read a couple of this author's books, but I do enjoy his writing. That would be the writing of Truman Capote, and that is the book In Cold Blood. So, like you said before the show started, this was one of the books that came up as part of like the talent discussion.
Yeah.
Because Capote is known for being a pretty incredible writer. being known as like the exemplar for specifically looking at true crime. This is like one of the first like true crime books that was written the way that like kind of we understand of true crime today. So it's about a farming family who was murdered. It's a true story. They were murdered, and it's kind of the whole investigation and the story and the shock and the aftermath of this particular event in this small town. And when you kind of get into like the story and the lore of how this book came about, it took quite a long time to read it. Truman Capote did go and interview many people in the town, and I think it's just one of the better versions of how like investigative reporting and nonfiction true crime writing should go.
Wow, this book came out in 1966 is what I'm seeing as the date it was first published. I had no idea it was that old. I thought this was much more recent than that. That's wild. Yeah. Who knew it would kick off one of the most lucrative genres of podcast, TV, movies, books, television, radio, and any other form of storytelling that will ever exist.
Yeah, and it's when you get into it, there's so few people that do it quite as well as he did with this.
Yeah.
I think Michelle McNamara did a really good job with the book that she did, I'll Be Gone in the Dark, and that was a really great kind of investigatory journalism piece. But yeah, there are a lot of people that sensationalize stuff, and it's unfortunate because, they could use this as an example in cold blood. So that's a strong recommendation for me.
Cool. And yeah, just as you said, I actually chose to exclude that, and maybe I shouldn't have, but that was an example in my reading and development of this episode. They were saying like, it took him 5 years to write this. He really, really spent time working on the prose, on the writing, on trying to get it exactly right.
Right.
On the storytelling, on the organization. So yeah, those people who just, the overall product is the result of a ton of work.
Absolutely.
This is maybe a ton of work. I don't know. It seems like it was. I'm recommending a board game again. This is a relatively new one that I got. I don't know if it'll be commercially available at the time this is released, but I got the sort of Kickstarter version of it so far. It is called Mercurial. The game designer is David Go, who has designed one other game that I'm aware of. This is a card game, essentially about you use cards to sort of craft spells. So there's custom cards that are in here that have essentially what you're trying to do is collect these cards that allow you to sort of buy these bigger sort of objective cards, if you will. And it's about sort of strategically choosing which ones you're going to take and how you're going to use them once you get them. Like I said, the whole idea is about it casting spells. It is probably on a little bit heavier end in terms of complexity than what people are maybe used to, but it's really not bad. I think most people who can follow general rules will be able to understand and play this game and enjoy it. And the artwork on it is just beautiful. Just really incredible, like, look of the game. When you see it all set up, it looks amazing. Even though they're just they're sort of they're very large cards, almost tarot sized.
Yeah,
really, really cool game. So if you're looking for a cool new card game, then you like the theme of spell casting, I think you would really enjoy Mercurial for those out there who are into that sort of thing.
Yeah, it looks really cool.
Okay, I think that is all I have. Do you have anything else that you'd like to add or that I missed before we wrap up?
No, I think that covers it.
Perfect. If you would like to tell us anything that we got wrong or got right, or just to tell us how awesome we are, you can email us directly at info@wwd.podcast.com, or of course, reach out to us on the social media platforms that are not run by Nazis.
Yes.
I think that is it. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you for recording with me today, Shane.
Always.
This is Abraham.
And this is Shane.
We're out.
See ya.
You've been listening to Why We Do What We Do. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to www.wwdpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you have an awesome day.